I'm glad we're in frozen, not in chilled. Pizza is fairly recession proof, and some ready meals actually grow during recession because people are eating out less, so they'll buy a pizza in rather than go to a restaurant, order a takeaway. So it's going to be really challenging. What's definitely the case is that the supermarkets are battening down the hatches. So as you said earlier, they're not putting in the number of new products that they were a year or two ago, and they're being very cautious about introducing new brands and companies because of supply chain issues.
So, welcome to the Innovate Podcast, the show where we discuss, dissect, and attempt to rebuild the world of product innovation within consumer goods. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike and Joe Hill, co-founders of One Planet Pizza. Mike and Joe, welcome to the Innovate Podcast. How are you both today?
Very good, thanks, Ben. Yeah, looking forward to the chat.
Excellent. So let's just, so the listeners kind of understand a bit more about the business and about you guys, let's just kind of get to know you. So, do you want to each introduce yourself and then talk to us about the One Planet Pizza story for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Joe, the son of the father and son team. I mainly focus on brand building, marketing, and product development at this moment in time for the business. Okay,
perfect. Good to meet you, Joe.
I'm Mike. I'm the father. Obviously, if he's the son, I'm the father of the father and son team. We started off the business about 6-7 years ago. I've been vegan a long time, always loved pizza, wanted to do a plant-based business, and having enjoyed set up and run several companies during my career, was keen on getting Joe into running his own business fairly early on.
Very good. So give us a sense of the kind of scale of One Planet Pizza now. You set it up 6 or 7 years ago. Where can we find the pizzas across the UK?
I guess at the moment, probably 78% of our turnover is UK based. So the business grew fairly organically through independent health stores that probably everyone's got in their village, town, or city centre. And that's still probably 50-60% of what we do. More recently, we've got a listing in around 65 Asda stores. So we've been in those Asda stores around the country for the last 4 or 5 months on what they call their nurture program, focused on new challenger brands coming through. Whole Foods down in London, those people that are London based will obviously know the Whole Foods stores. And then recently in the UK, we've started getting listings in the speedy grocers, people like Get Here. 1 or 2 others are based around the whole country now. And then you may have some listeners who are abroad. So at the moment, you can get the pizzas in quite a lot of places in Holland, Benelux, and 1 or 2 places in France, Spain, Portugal, and up in Scandinavia. Very big in Iceland as well, interestingly, Ben.
Oh, really?
So,
right.
Yeah. It's a surprise. Iceland is very big on frozen food. This is the country, not the store.
Right. Okay.
Very good, very big on frozen food in Iceland, and very strong on plant-based. So I think we're in about 30 or 40 supermarkets, the main couple of chains in Iceland as well.
Oh, right. Wow. Very interesting. So the show is about product innovation, but as a fellow kind of entrepreneur in the food industry, I'm genuinely interested in the startup journey. What's the kind of the main challenges been over the past few years getting the business from zero to where you are today?
Plenty of challenges. we always quite happy to talk about these and discuss how we work through them. It's kind of been a big part of our journey, hasn't it, Mike? Is overcoming various unforeseen challenges over the years, including Brexit, pandemic, just to name a few. I guess for us, the thing that stands out is that we started as a very, very small company, and we're still a small challenger brand with very small budgets, very tight budgets, and very small teams, and not many resources to play with. So our main challenge over the years has been that we're trying to wrestle our way into a hugely dominated traditional sector within frozen category.
Yep.
So frozen pizza, especially, is absolutely dominated by some huge multinational, household names with enormous budgets and enormous buying power. So
sure.
That's what we're really up against, and that hasn't changed since we started. So that's been our main obstacle and our main challenge, and still is.
Yes, I can imagine. It's a very, very big, high penetration category, but that means lots of brands with lots of money.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's finding our gap in that market, and bringing new customers in and convincing the supermarkets that we're offering them a unique point of difference that big companies just don't have.
Yeah, sure. Oh, it's a very, very impressive journey. Well, next couple of minutes, we'll just kind of run through some questions so the listeners can know a bit more about you guys as individuals. So, starting with you, Mike, you've been vegan for a couple of decades, I believe now, if not a little longer.
4 decades.
4 decades. Wow, gosh. So, what's your favourite city in the UK for plant-based food from a eating out perspective, restaurant?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. Well, we're fortunate enough to live in Norwich, and Norwich, Brighton, Bristol, and London are probably the 4 biggest and best cities in terms of vegan food.
Okay.
I'm a little bit biased because before I set up and started working on One Pound Pizza, I actually had a vegan vegetarian restaurant in Norwich.
Right, okay.
It's still going now. Some of the menu items are still the original ones. So I'm going to be totally biased and say that's probably in Norwich would be my favourite place, even though I don't own it or run it anymore. But then I think I'd be looking at probably 1 or 2 of the places in Brighton. And I tend to be very much, I love Indian food and Lebanese food. So I tend to gravitate, even if they're not totally plant-based. In Brighton, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a fantastic Lebanese restaurant, and it's authentic, quite basic, but authentic, original Lebanese food. Probably 50%, 60% is vegan. So that would be my go-to, either South Indian, and there's a couple of really good independents in Norwich called Namaste, or Lebanese, finding a really good one, even if it's not 100% plant-based. I know they can have a great veggie vegan menu. Yeah,
right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Lebanese. And Joe, what would your final meal be? The slightly cliche death row meal question.
Death row meal.
Yeah.
I mean, being loyal and true to the company that we've grown, I'm going to go pizza. And to be fair, we just catered a wedding and did 100% vegan wedding. Now fresh hand-stretched dough done by yourself with the fresh, for me, garlicky, fresh tomato sauce, proper passata, lots of that, and then a really decent vegan cheese and a nice barbecue sauce on top. For me, I think a fresh slice of pizza, Mike, and a bit of garlic mayonnaise. That's my final meal. I'll take that to heaven with me any day. Probably a bit of cheesecake, peanut butter cheesecake to follow as well. We always have a dessert.
Very good, very good. And then Joe, as someone who's you started out your career in the food industry, what would you say to a young person considering kind of getting involved in a startup in the food and drink industry? What's your experience been of it thus far?
No, it is. If you're up for a challenge, you'll find it in the food and drink sector. It's very fast moving. It's all about achieving high volumes and maintaining margins. It's not a quick win. There's no such thing, especially in this category, as an overnight success. And we know that ourselves personally, but talking to brands and just immersing ourselves in this community and space. It's I saw a talk recently where they compared fast-growing challenger brands in multiple categories, and the famous one is the internet, the .com space, and it shows you how quickly these brands like Uber, Google can grow enormously and globally over time very rapidly and become huge companies. Whereas food and drink are much limited. They are, with the product development, ingredient prices, and competition and shelf space, lots of different factors mean that it just takes a lot longer. So you have to be a little more patient in this game. But I think the more time we spend in food and drink, the more we enjoy it, because you get to actually fully immerse yourself in your own product, and physically eat it and try it, and then look at all of the ingredients and all of the the competition and the other similar brands. And for us, it's all about plant-based food, so you get to really immerse yourself in the sector and get involved on a very personal, intimate level. So I'd highly recommend it for a challenge, and for that aspect. If you love food, you get to know everything about it inside out, and learn a heck of a lot as well.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well that leads us quite nicely onto the kind of the main topic of the podcast in that case. So we're gonna focus on products, product innovation, and the product itself that you guys have developed, and try and think a little bit about some of the processes that you've used to kind of bring product to market, and think, get your reflections on how the plant-based sector is evolving. I wanted just to start with your kind of core pizza products from an R&D and innovation perspective. How hard has it been to develop a plant-based pizza that delivers on taste and texture and value and all of the expectations that consumers have? And what's the process that you followed to achieve that?
Yeah, that's why I kick off. It's not difficult to produce a plant-based pizza, because a lot of pizzas, obviously, if it's a vegetarian pizza, the only non-vegan thing would be the cheese.
Right.
A lot of pizza bases are vegan. Some of them have egg or milk, tend to be more restaurant ones. But probably the majority, the base is vegan, the sauce is vegan, the toppings are vegan, unless you're obviously moving towards meat and fish.
Yeah.
And so that really just leaves the cheese. And it's interesting, there was a very popular original Italian pizza called the Mariana, and that is a cheeseless pizza. It's basically the pizza base with the tomato sauce and perhaps one or two vegetable toppings and olive oil and oregano and basil on. So vegan pizzas have been around for a long time. The challenge is, I think, twofold. First of all, it's around the cheese, because vegan cheese, rightly so, has had a bad rap over the years. It's only recently started getting better. And a lot of our time and energy over the last few years has been working with different vegan cheese manufacturers and really trying to nail that in terms of, taste and texture, but also its stringiness, pulliness, how it freezes and then cooks again. So I think that's been real focus. And then the second challenge is the extent to which the vegans, the flexitarians, the reducitarians, climatarians, whatever you call them, those people that are now starting to eat vegan or want plant-based pizza, sometimes because of the health of the animals, but increasingly because of the environmental benefits of having more plant-based diet. The challenge is then in how meaty, how much can you replicate the ham on a Hawaiian, the pepperoni on a pepperoni pizza, and that's where the challenge comes in. We're finding that it used to be our free cheese and our med veg used to be our most popular flavors, but now it's the Hawaiian and number one is the pepperoni or pepperoni, as we call it.
Right.
And it's so the challenge for those ones is about how well you can replicate the meat elements and the cheese elements, so that it's the hardcore. It's not so that these flexitarians, the people that are just trying to swap out a meat and dairy pizza for a plant-based one. We want to get to the stage where it tastes as good, they can't notice the difference, and therefore why wouldn't you do it if it's going to be better for the environment, better for the animals, but also we manage as well to make them slightly better health-wise. We're not claiming that our pizzas are a health food, but what we do claim is that they, because of their plant-based, they have 30% less saturated fat, 20-25% less salt and sugar. So there's no reason at all why we can't make them slightly healthier than the average, big multinational pizza.
Yeah, sure. No, that's interesting. You mentioned consumers in terms of segmentation there. Do you know from your retail partners what profile of consumers are buying into your brand? Is it mostly vegans and vegetarians, or are you attracting, flexitarians and omnivores away from traditional pizza products?
This has been an ongoing unanswered debate for us. So to begin with, it was a lot easier when we were smaller and we were just selling our pizzas to local health stores, because then we had a direct link and communication chain with the people actually buying the pizzas. You know, I'd be dropping them off and putting them in the shelves in Norwich, and I'd meet the people coming in and buying them every week, and they would mostly be vegans, because we were focusing, you know, laser focusing our marketing and brand on, you know, at the vegan community back in 2016, 2017. But we know they only make up, you know, roughly 2-3% of the UK population. So to launch a brand, it made sense to focus on them, and they would be our sort of die-hard customers for life that would be really supportive and really helpful in terms of feedback and helping us build the brand. But as we grew sort of 2017 up until now, we've been very conscious that the much larger proportion of the consumers that might buy our pizzas, and it's continuing to grow, is the flexitarian consumer. So that hasn't slowed down. I think they now make up very roughly, you know, I think about 30% of households have a flexitarian in them, which is incredible. And this is the chunk of the population that we think we're appealing to the most. Now, we can't afford a lot of that data to prove it from the supermarkets as a small brand, which is part of the challenge. But we can sort of find this out through other ways, like social media, Vypr, which we'll come on to later, I'm sure. And there are other tools we can use internally without trying to get the actual data from the supermarkets. But hopefully, if we launch with someone like Tesco or Co-op, for example, then as soon as they have a club card which links all of that consumer information back to what they're purchasing, then we start getting a lot of that rich data. But from what we gather, educated guesses at the moment, most of the people buying our pizzas in Asda, for example, are slightly more affluent than their average shopper, usually 80 households, a lot of young families or young couples starting families. And we think they're not vegan, probably not vegetarian. Most of them are going to be flexitarian, or just generally quite interested in healthier choices. So this is something we need to find out as soon as possible, and have some data to seriously back it up. But it's still quite early days for us to find that out. Sure.
Okay. I mean, I personally find the plant-based sector fascinating. I think it's the most interesting part of the food and drink industry at the moment, because it's the only category that kind of crosses every potential food and drink category, really, in terms of the impact it could have, either kind of further down the supply chain or directly in the products that consumers are buying. Mike, you've been in and around it for 20 or 30 years. What are your observations on the plant-based sector as a whole at the moment? How is it evolving?
I mean, the big change is the movement of the big producers, the big co-manufacturers, the big brands into it. Obviously, 30, 40, 20, even 10 years ago, if you wanted to get a vegan sausage or burger or cheese or even milk, you were really limited to very small specialist brands. So take, for example, something like Oatly. People don't realise that Oatly has been around for 20, 25 years. And I used to see it in independent specialist health stores alongside another brand called Provenel, which has been around for a long time. And it would sit there and it looked your classic, specialist, bit hippie, bit, it's the sort of thing that you find in an independent health store, but nowhere else at all. And then Oatly suddenly decided to reposition themselves and move out of that specialist market into the mass market, complete change in market positioning. And they're now one of the biggest and fastest growing plant-based milk companies out there. But we've now we feel the competition and the big change, I guess, in terms of large companies like Dr. Oetker's or Goodfellas, the big, massive international pizza companies, and now moving into the plant-based pizza sector. But then the other thing is you've got quite large, well-funded new companies, challenger companies like Meatless Farm, coming into the meat and the dairy. You've got the American companies coming over, like Beyond, coming over as well. Most of these companies, not most of them, some of them have got massive backing, but they're now coming up against the meat and dairy companies who are now starting to buy out brands and or develop their own brands. So we've got something like Vypr Gourmet, for example. First saw the adverts for it about a year ago. It looks, for everything it's worth, it looks like it's a new independent challenger brand focusing on plant-based food for ethical reasons, who's owned by Nestle.
Right.
You just don't realise. So people like Nestle, Unilever are now developing brands or sub-brands that look just like real challenger brands like ourselves. So we're really fighting on so many different levels, and there's so much noise out there that it's really difficult to cut through. I guess sometimes we talk about ourselves trying to be the Ben & Jerry's of the pizza world.
Right.
That's Ben & Jerry's model. But I think the challenge is that I think it would be very much more difficult for Ben & Jerry's to do what they did 10 years ago compared to now, because the bigger companies, the multinationals, have now got their own incubator schemes. They've got their own plant-based divisions, which are looking at produce, either investing or buying out or developing their own plant-based challenger brands. So it's a really interesting but very flexible and very challenging marketplace. Yeah,
for sure. There's a huge amount of interest, and arguably the retailers have slightly plateaued, I think, in the last year or two in terms of the amount of space that they've got versus the volume of brands and manufacturers coming into the sector. So I think there's a slight inflection point coming up soon.
Definitely. If you go down the chilled sector and look at plant-based meats, burgers and sausages, the number of brands there is crazy. And they've got a ridiculous amount of brands. They've got 1 or 2 SKUs from each brand. Yeah. And it looks a bit of a mess compared to the rest of the supermarket. So I think there's definitely going to be some rationalisation and falling out there.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting space. So just thinking about product innovation, again, what are your guys' plans from an innovation perspective in terms of how you kind of maintain this growth rate and bring more and more people into the brand over the coming years?
Yeah, for us, the more research we do and the more we look at sort of customer feedback and the market itself and the competition, the more we realise that for us, for pizza, taste is king, and it seems more and more important that we focus on flavour and indulgence and seeing pizza as a treat. And we're learning, so for example, launching into Asda, we're learning more about how these shoppers in particular, I think the flexitarian market in the UK at least, want the meatier, cheesier, more realistic alternatives for pizza at least than we ever presumed. So that's been really interesting for us because we thought it was going that way, but every time we launch into a new retailer or store, it seems to be more and more apparent that that's what the average shopper is after. So it's helping us sort of just tweak our direction in terms of innovation and product development. So NPD, we're looking at moving towards more meaty, more cheesy alternatives than we would have done on our own. And I think in terms of the range itself, for us, the competition is heating up, and compared to when we launched and there was no other vegan pizza on the market, every now 6 months or so, there seems to be a new vegan pizza launching, whether it's a new brand or a larger existing brand. So the latest was Crosta and Monaca, the sort of high top end premium Italian frozen and chilled pizza brands at a higher price point. So they've got a very strong proposition. They've just launched their first vegan pizza offering. So again, that's competition that wasn't there 6 to 12 months ago. So for me, the focus now is to look at ways we can even further improve and premiumize our current range. So an example is we're currently using a a really good stone-baked pizza base, thin and crispy. But we've just started sampling one which is wood-fired, stone-baked, and sourdough.
Right.
I think it's, if ours is now an 8 or 9 out of 10, this one is probably a 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. So for me, the priority is just making sure we remain the best tasting vegan pizza on the market. That's our best shot, I think, and that's who we want to be. That's the brand we want to be known as. Just like Mike said with Ben and Jerry's, I think they'll always seem to be, they get recognised as the tastiest ice cream in that category. So for me, that's the focus. We're looking at ways to constantly tweak and improve our current core range offering, and probably slightly taking the foot off the pedal of MPD, not completely. So that's the focus for me going forwards.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think innovation can be a bit of a distraction for smaller brands at times, because there's just a belief that you need to keep innovating to stay alive. But actually, having a core range of 3 or 4 absolutely market-beating products is arguably a better way to maintain that kind of growth and authenticity and very loyal customer base. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting fact we always get amazed by is that 70 to 80% of pizzas sold in Europe are only 3 flavors.
Right.
3 cheese. Was it 3 cheese, pepperoni, and med veg? Med veg,
right.
Yeah. Or meat feast.
I think it's a meat feast.
Feast, yeah.
In the UK, it's
incredibly condensed. Most people will just buy 1 of 3 flavors, and all the other flavors look very interesting, exciting, but make up a very small percentage of the marketplace.
Yeah. I think that's the way with many categories. You've got this kind of 80-20 rule of 80% of the value going through 20% of the range, and that's the case for startups and entire big categories as well. So your success as a brand over recent years, what would you put it down to then? Rather than just feeding you with some answers, I want to leave that question open. I'm intrigued to see what you say.
Do you want me to go, Mark?
Yeah, go for it.
For me, it's I like to think we have a sort of relentless, tireless drive and passion, which is sort of feeding our energy to push forward. So we're never resting, never sitting still. Hence the focus on always innovating and improving the current range. And then there are loads of challenges, and we have faced them all over the last few years, and really started from pretty much nothing. But we are still a very, vegan pizza in general as a subsector is very small. And, if we can only get a small percentage of that small category, then we can start, shifting some serious volumes. So we know the opportunities there, and we know it's a real David and Goliath situation. But I think me and Mike have always enjoyed the sort of Rodney and Del Boy challenge against the odds challenge.
Right.
And I don't think that's ever really stopped from day one, really. No. I think we've always just loved the challenge, and we've always believed that one way or another, we will get there. And I don't know what that success looks like, but I think we won't stop until we get there. And that, I don't think that's ever really faltered, has it?
No.
And it is most of your growth in the future likely to come from retail, do you think, or are you going to maintain those kind of diverse channels of either direct to consumer?
Yeah, I think D2C is. Certainly our D2C as a percentage of our overall sales has gone down since the end of lockdowns and pandemics.
Right.
And there's a challenge with frozen food. Obviously, it costs more money and it's less environmentally friendly to do direct to consumer with frozen. So I think our growth will come 2 channels probably. That's UK retail. We're doing pretty well in Asda, so we're hoping that will expand soon, or we'll get another listing. And then, interestingly, even despite Brexit, we've actually grown more in our export countries than we have in UK.
Right.
In Benelux, certainly, as I said, in Iceland, 1 or 2 other smaller countries. It's interesting that the competition is less fierce and the market is less price sensitive than it is in the UK.
Right. Okay.
Germany probably is the one exception. If you go to Germany, because they do eat a lot of frozen pizza and it's dominated by Aldi and Lidl. They've driven down the price. So with the exception of Germany, I think we've got potentially bigger opportunities outside of the UK than we have inside the UK.
And how have you unlocked that? Have you been using export agencies, or how have you kind of gone about building that business outside of the UK?
Yeah, we've got a super distributor who's based in Holland who we've been working with for 3 or 4 years. Found the DTI being very supportive. We've got a great contact in DTI, part of trade and industry, who's provides us with information, but also some very good grants, which allowed us to employ a specialist consultant for 12 months, and that really got the running start. Because I think, I think it's less price sensitive in some of these countries. There's 1 or 2 countries where they charge VAT on frozen pizza, which, like Spain and Portugal, which drives the price up and makes it more sensitive. Okay. But certainly in Holland, it's been a really big growth area for us. And as I said, Iceland has been rapid growth over the last 12 months as well.
And in terms of UK retail, I mean, that is often the prize for any kind of UK food and drink startup. You guys have won the listing at Asda and successfully maintained it. What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs in different categories about how to kind of go about tackling that retail challenge?
I guess our learnings are that stand out off the top of my head would be that we've never hidden away from sort of being authentic and being ourselves. As the founders and owners of the business, we've always approached. We've got a commercial manager, but I think it's really valuable to show your face at meetings and to be part of those email threads and jump in occasionally, just to show how involved you are and committed to growing the brand with the retailers. And a lot of stuff I've seen recently is sort of backed up what I've always believed in, which was just to really have a personality. Because for us, or other challenger brands in the industry, we're up against huge global conglomerates, Nestle's, and these buyers will have meetings with senior people from Nestle and Unilever, and they'll all probably talk the same way and be very, very business minded and professional and talk a lot about numbers. And for buyers, that's probably not very exciting. So the advantage of a challenger brand is if you can come along and have a bit of a personality and a bit of a story and mix it up a little bit, then I think that will help you get noticed and remembered for these buyers, but also it just breaks up their day, and it probably it's a bit more fun and interesting for them, so you're more likely to get remembered. So that's what I think was really helpful for us to get in front of Asda, and also just not being afraid if you send 5 emails and don't get a reply across 6 months. You've just got to you've got to be. I heard a podcast recently where another founder said you've got to use polite harassment, which I thought was quite appropriate terminology.
That's very good.
You've got to find a good balance, and Matt's been brilliant from our team, because I think he emails, say for example when we're trying to get into Asda, it was an email every week with a slightly different story and update to keep it fresh and interesting. And then eventually, however many months in, he got a reply, and it was for the incubator. So you've just got to be prepared to play the long game. Yeah,
for sure. And the context that we find ourselves in now in terms of the cost of living crisis, how do you think that's likely to impact startups and SMEs in the food and drink sector over the next year?
Yeah, I think it's got to make it tougher, hasn't it? I think I was listening to a classic old Tony Robbins broadcast, and it wasn't that old actually, because he was talking about this concept of seasonality and wintertime from a business and economic point of view. And he was saying, wintertime is the time to really focus on getting the basics right, planning for the future, getting ready for spring and summer where you know it's going to grow. So I think to a certain extent, wintertime is about survival, and it does. Some plant-based businesses aren't going to get through this next year or two, definitely. I think we've got a slight advantage in that frozen food and pizza in particular is a little bit resistant to cost of living crises. But on the downside, we are a slightly niche premium product, which might fall by the wayside in some people's shopping baskets. So I think there's pros and cons. As I say, I'm glad we're in frozen, not in chilled. Pizza is fairly recession proof, and some ready meals actually grow during recession because people are eating out less, so they'll buy a pizza in rather than go to a restaurant, order a takeaway. So it's going to be really challenging. What's definitely the case is that the supermarkets are battening down the hatches. So as you said earlier, they're not putting in the number of new products that they were a year or two ago, and they're being very cautious about introducing new brands and companies because of supply chain issues. So that's something else that we're actually addressing as we speak, is improving our production and supply chain capability, because that's something which the big multiples are really looking at now. How it's all right going with a young brand and launching in, or challenger brand and launching into supermarkets, but how resilient is their supply chain? Because it's a nightmare for them if 3 months in you suddenly can't get your tomatoes over from Italy or whatever. So I think supply chain resilience is going to be crucial.
Right. Okay. So do you think it's fair to say that innovation will take a little bit of a back seat for the next 6 to 12 months?
For us, sorry, Ben, or generally?
I guess both. We're interested in your guys' perspective, but also what you think about the kind of the plant sector as a whole. Is that is the industry likely to kind of rein back on NPD and innovation whilst this kind of economic crisis
I'll say
over?
One thing, Joe, and then pass over to you. I think it will, if only because the whole investment, the investment landscape has totally changed. From a year or 2 years ago, it's much more difficult to get risk investment at the moment. Most of the funds are closing or reducing significantly what they do. I think a lot of investors are focusing on their existing investments and supporting them and making sure that they get through the next year or two. So there's definitely less funding around in terms of early stage, pre-startup, bootstrap, right up to Series A. I think there's a lot less funding opportunities around. So that's got to, in some ways, halt or reduce innovation. But I guess on the other hand, it's when businesses get under stress and get challenged that you've got to be more innovative in some ways. So it's that balance that we are looking at doing. One or two things to our pizza range, which is going to make it have more USP, more distinctive. So I guess that is innovation, but it's more tweaking and changing things rather than coming up with big new launches, I'd say. Right.
Okay. And unfortunately, we are running out of time, guys. But we're going to end on a positive note and move away from economic crises. What's the best product launch you've seen in the market over the last couple of years?
Other companies.
Yes. Yeah.
We've actually been stacking on one right here.
Right.
So we share invested. It's another plant-based brand.
Right.
So it's founder-led. We know the guys quite well. We share some of the same investors, which helps. So this is Native Snacks. So they do the world's first branded vegan alternative to prawn crackers.
Okay.
So hugely addictive, pretty much the same price. And I think they've launched into a couple of UK supermarkets. So fairly easy to find and follow in the UK. But that's just a really nice, easy alternative to what was once not a vegan product at all.
And how does that deliver on taste and texture versus the kind of the equivalent that everyone has eaten at Chinese restaurants?
Yeah, I think it is noticeably different, but I think in a good way. I've let a lot of people who aren't vegan try it, and they're all pretty obsessed.
Right.
So, I think it's a pretty easy swap. Another one for me would be Minor Figures, one of the bigger UK-based oat milk companies, but they do an incredible. I get a subscription of their barrister milk because barista milk because it doesn't curdle like a lot of them, and I think it's better than Oatly. It's a very good product.
Oh, really? Right, I'll have to try that. Okay. Okay. Very good.
No, I'd go with those two. Good choice.
Yeah, it's a lot of good. One of the quick one, Ben. One of the best chocolates we ever had, and there's a lot of good vegan brands out there now. But we got sent some On Bar, so OM Bar. They do a new oat milk range, which they haven't ever done before. So it's slightly healthier. They did like a chocolate truffle oat milk bar in sort of fully compostable packaging, but that's one of the best chocolates I've ever had. So keep your eyes peeled for that one.
I will do. On Bar. Right, I've written that down. Excellent. Very good. Well, unfortunately, guys, we're out of time. I found it fascinating talking to you. I could talk for another hour or two. But thank you very much for your time, both of you.
No, Ben, it's been a pleasure. We'd like to thank you for I know it's not about Vypr, this podcast, but we definitely found it really good tool to use for the last 3 months. Every time we make an approach to one of the supermarkets, we always do some research on Vypr and use that.
That's good to hear.
Front and central for our presentation. So yeah, keep up the good work in developing that company, definitely.
No, that's very good to hear. I appreciate that. Well, yeah, Mike, Joe, thank you for your time. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers.
Okay.
We really hope you enjoyed that episode of the Innovate Podcast. To hear more bi-weekly episodes, please hit the subscribe button below. Thank you.